Welcome to Episode 7 from Stavius, Volume 1 in the Chronicles of Mearth trilogy. We begin Chapter 3 with Mark and Staven starting to learn about how other people dream of this world, which Mark names Mearth.
Chapter 3. Staven and Mark. Mark felt relieved, and slightly guilty, to discover that Staven also had no idea of what was going on. Urtish appeared to be a low-level administrator going through a standard check-in process.
He was trying to rush through a well-rehearsed orientation presentation because it was midday, and he didn't want to miss lunch.
His orientation overview explained that they were in a camp designed and staffed to train people in advanced magic, fighting, and prophecy. Soul Reapers appeared in the valley every few years with 4 conjoined candidates to be prepared as heroes destined to fulfill an ancient prophecy. And they would also bring someone like Janice. So the Soul Reapers aren't terrifying creatures? Asked Staven. No, they are terrifying, Urtish disagreed, but the food will be gone if you keep asking questions. Mark wanted to ask about Urtish's apparent dislike of Janice, but decided not to ask until after lunch.
Urtish told them that candidates typically arrived shortly after their 13th birthdays in March or April, and then trained hard for 2 to 3 months before leaving on their journey by mid-year.
Their preparation was arduous and limited because the candidates had to become heroes and fulfill the prophecy before their next birthday. But why before their birthday? Mark blurted out. Urtish glared at him and said, because you can only be conjoined in your prime. But that's ridiculous, laughed Staven. Everyone knows that you don't reach your prime until you're 18 or 20, although perhaps I am already there. He flexed his arms and admired his physique. No, both your ages must be prime numbers, grumbled Urtish. Then, seeing Staven's perplexed expression, added, Marius, would you be kind enough to enlighten Staven about prime numbers while I work on these forms? Mark tried to explain that a prime number is any number which can only be divided by 1 or by itself to create an integer. He gave examples like 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, 17, and 19, but gave up when Staven asked what the term divided meant. Urtish shook his head and explained to Mark that the people here had a minimal educational background. Few can do more than simple addition and subtraction, almost no one can read or write, and there's virtually no concept of any form of science. Think about it, said Urtish. We have magic, so we have little need to study, build, or calculate. Who needs engineering if all it takes to build a house is leaning some sticks together and enchanting the structure? Who needs chemistry if you can magically transform a glass of water into wine or beer? Who needs medicine if you can charm a cold away? Math and science disappeared a long time ago in this world, if they ever existed at all. Now, I must insist, no more questions before lunch. So we're part of the next group of heroes, and we're going on a quest, Mark asked, despite Mr. Urtish's request. Both Staven and Mark were starting to feel excited. No, you are part of the next group of heroes to attempt to fulfill the prophecy, groaned Urtish. There is only one prophecy, and we've been training and sending heroes to attempt to fulfill it for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And please, don't use the word quest. It makes all this sound like some medieval fantasy game. But if no one has ever succeeded, what happens to the heroes? Asked Staven as he felt his stomach begin to churn. How are we supposed to prepare you foolish boys to save the world if you can't even understand and follow a simple rule about no questions before lunch? Bellowed Urtish as he began walking toward the cave entrance. No heroes have ever succeeded, and few have ever been seen again. Are you happy? Now do you understand why we don't discuss this before a meal? That's it. We're done for now. Follow me. Staven trotted after Urtish as Mark mentally started to ask what Staven thought never being seen again meant.
Staven interrupted his thought to suggest they follow Urtish's advice.
The cave was cool and dry, with the aroma of dust and old sweat which swirled up as they moved.
The massive chamber rapidly diminished to a 15-foot-high by 20-foot-wide tunnel, which twisted around for over 100 feet before opening onto a gravel landing midway up a hill.
Staven paused to shield his eyes when they stepped out of the cave into the brilliant sunlight. He took a moment to enjoy the view of the valley below. A small river snaked along the cliff base below them to create an oxbow island in the middle of the valley. There was a narrow road leading down the hill from the cave mouth, which wound through the broad field before crossing a bridge to the island. Mark thought the grassy field looked like it was set up for a sort of knights tournament, with banners furling in the light breeze.
The island was filled with stone cottages, with 20 or 30 people milling around a public square.
Mark truly felt like he was in a medieval fantasy game, despite Mr. Urtish's dislike of the comparison. "This is no time to play tourist," Urtish shouted. He was already far below them. "If you don't hurry, you'll go hungry." Stephen jogged to catch up to Urtish at the bridge, which Mark thought was the most fantastical structure he'd ever seen.
It spanned the river in one graceful arch, and was broad enough for 2 carts to pass.
The structure was constructed out of perfectly shaped stones so accurately placed that there were almost no visible gaps. The road was smoothly paved, and there were flags and banners draped over the sides and fluttering from poles set in the railings. This was more than a bridge. This was a gateway built to welcome victorious heroes. He thought, "Wow, this is amazing." The gateway was decorated with triumphant statues of heroes atop polished black granite pedestals in front of the bridge. Those pedestals were so highly polished that they not only reflected the bright sunshine, they reflected passers-by, which enabled Mark to see Stephen for the first time. Stephen was about 6 feet tall and muscular. He had tight, curly hair, a moderately dark complexion, and would have been a movie or a rock star on Earth. He stood out even here, where everyone seemed to be good-looking. Stephen caught Mark staring at the pedestal, and Mark hurriedly looked away in embarrassment. Stephen muttered, "I've seen better." Urtish was so focused on lunch that he paid no attention to the gleaming bridge. They briskly walked across the bridge and arrived in the small village. There were nods of greeting to Urtish as they joined the end of the lunch line in the square, providing Mark another opportunity to inspect his surroundings. He could tell he wasn't anywhere on Earth. It just felt magical. The village looked like a movie set where everything was perfect and nothing was rotting or under construction. Mark could smell lunch cooking, but there was no smoke. He found that the air was purer than any he had ever breathed. There was no exhaust smell, traffic noise, or airplane contrails. It was pristine. It was too perfect to be anything back home.
Mark was nudged out of his reverie by a cook gruffly asking what he wanted.
He saw corn, green beans, a variety of lentil soup, rice, and bread. He asked, "Do you have any meat?" And the cook grunted, "Hey, everyone, we have a new arrival." Stephen silenced Mark and took a little of everything. He silently explained that all animals, like people, contained magical essence, and that consuming magical essence was a painful dietary mistake which should be avoided at all costs. He added that the rule wasn't limited to meat, though. A magically ripened mango would have the same painful result because it was infused with magical essence. However, there is no harm in using magic to weed gardens or to prepare food. "So you mean there's no bacon on this planet?" thought Mark. "What's bacon?" thought Stephen. "Never mind, you just shattered my fantasy of how perfect this place is," lamented Mark. They walked over to the small table where Urtish was waving at them. "Welcome to the heroes' table," he mumbled with a mouthful of food. Mark and Stephen sat at a table with 6 seats positioned nearest to the food. The remaining 15 to 20 people sat crowded together at one enormously long table a few feet away, with Janus sitting by himself at the far end. "So now that we're safely eating lunch, can you tell us a little more about this place?" asked Mark while Urtish stuffed his face with food. "Sure, what would you like to know?" mumbled Urtish with a mouthful of food as he reached for a mug of water. "Well, why don't you start by telling us where we are? Stephen calls this place Earth, but Mark knows this isn't the same as his Earth," said Stephen/Mark, who were getting very confused with whose words were coming out of their mouth. "You're both right, of course," answered Urtish after he finished his drink. "This isn't Mark's Earth, and you aren't speaking the same language. You can understand each other because you know each other's thoughts before they get translated into words. And Mark, before you ask, you know what other people are saying here because your host's mind is doing the translation into thoughts you can interpret. So Earth is just the name both of you give the planet upon which you live. You also use the same words for the moon, the sun, our 2 neighboring planets, Venus and Mars, although the residents of this Earth prefer to call the moon Luna. I hear what you're saying, but doesn't it get confusing calling both places by the same name since they're so different? Asked Mark. I suppose so, answered Ratish as he reached for a biscuit, but it doesn't come up as much as you might suspect. After all, our visitors don't remember their dreams when they wake up, and our hosts can never travel to their Earth. There is rarely a reason to talk about the two places in the same conversation. I assure you that while it feels awkward right now, you'll never even think about it once you're fully conjoined. But it's confusing. I'm going to call this place Mearth, which is short for Magical Earth, proclaimed Mark. Ratish stared at him and said, Please don't. That is just stupid.
I'm Gregory Chumley. Learn more about the Chronicles of Mearth and purchase books on Amazon or at www.cholmonco.com/Mearth. Cholmonco Storyteller books are an exciting innovation in reading. Each chapter contains a QR code which you can scan with your smartphone to listen to streaming audio of me telling you the story while you read.